Tonight, we explore a timeless question that has haunted humanity for ages. If you could have anything you desired, would you dare to ask for it? Join us for a chilling story about the Miller family, who discovered that some wishes come with a price far too terrible to pay. This is a tale of fate, consequence, and the terrifying realization that some doors are best left unopened. The night was a tempest of cold rain and howling wind, but inside the small, cozy parlor of Maple Creek Cottage, a cheerful fire crackled in the hearth. The blinds were shut tight against the storm, casting a warm, flickering glow upon a father and son engrossed in a game of chess. Mr. Miller, a man with rather imaginative ideas about the game, had put his king in such reckless and needless danger that it drew a soft sigh from the white-haired old woman knitting peacefully by the fire. "Listen to that wind," said Mr. Miller. Having just noticed a fatal blunder far too late, he was hoping to distract his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," his son, Michael, replied grimly, his eyes fixed on the board. He reached out his hand. "Check." "I hardly think he'll make it through this storm tonight," his father mused, his hand hovering over the board. "Mate," Michael announced. "That's the worst part of living so far out," Mr. Miller burst out with a sudden, unexpected fury. "Of all the miserable, muddy, out-of-the-way places, this is the worst. The path is a swamp, the road is a river. I don't know what they're thinking, letting it get this bad." Now, dear," his wife said soothingly, "perhaps you'll win the next game." Mr. Miller looked up just in time to see a knowing glance pass between his wife and son. The complaint died on his lips, and he hid a guilty smile in his thin gray beard. "There he is," Michael said, as the front gate banged shut and heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel path. The old man rose with a host's haste. Opening the door, he could be heard trading sympathies with the new arrival about the dreadful weather. The visitor, it seemed, was also quite sorry for himself. Mrs. Miller tutted softly and coughed as her husband re-entered the room, followed by a tall, brawny man with a weathered, reddish face. "Sergeant Major Davies," Mr. Miller said, making the introduction. The sergeant major shook hands, took the offered chair by the fire, and watched with contentment as his host brought out whiskey and glasses. At the third glass, his eyes began to shine, and he started to talk. The small family circle listened with rapt attention, captivated by this visitor from distant lands who spoke of strange scenes and daring deeds, of wars and plagues and foreign peoples. 21 years of it, Mr. Miller said, nodding toward his wife and son. When he left, he was just a skinny kid from the warehouse. Look at him now. "He doesn't seem to have suffered much for it," Mrs. Miller said politely. "I'd love to go to India myself," the old man said, "just to see the sights, you know." "Better where you are," the sergeant major said, shaking his head. He put down his empty glass, sighed softly, and then shook his head again. "I'd love to see those old temples, the fakers and the jugglers," said Mr. Miller. "What was that story you started telling me the other day about a monkey's paw or something?" "Nothing," the soldier said quickly. "At least, nothing worth hearing." "A monkey's paw?" Mrs. Miller asked, her curiosity piqued. "Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, I suppose," the sergeant major said casually. His three listeners leaned forward, their interest ignited. The visitor absently raised his empty glass to his lips, then set it down. His host promptly refilled it. "To look at," said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket, "it's just an ordinary little paw, dried up like a mummy." He pulled something out and offered it. Mrs. Miller recoiled with a grimace, but her son took it and examined it with curiosity. "And what's so special about it?" inquired Mr. Miller, taking it from his son and placing it on the table. "It had a spell cast on it by an old fakir," the sergeant major explained, "a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who interfered with it did so to their own sorrow. He put a spell on it so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it." His tone was so grave that their light-hearted laughter felt jarring and out of place. "Well, why don't you have 3 wishes, sir?" Michael asked cleverly. The soldier looked at him the way middle age often regards brash youth. "I have," he said quietly, and his blotchy face seemed to turn pale. "And were your 3 wishes really granted?" asked Mrs. Miller. "They were," said the sergeant major, his glass tapping against his teeth. "Has anyone else wished?" the old lady inquired. "The first man had his 3 wishes, yes," was the reply. "I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got the paw." His voice was so solemn that a hush fell over the group. "If you've had your 3 wishes, it's no good to you now then, Davies," said the old man finally. "Why do you keep it?" The soldier shook his head. "Sentiment, I suppose," he said slowly. "I did think of selling it, but I don't think I will. It's caused enough trouble already. Besides, people won't buy. They think it's a fairy tale, and those who do entertain the idea want to try it first and pay later." "If you could have another 3 wishes," Mr. Miller said, eyeing him keenly, "would you take them?" "I don't know," the other said. "I don't know." He took the paw and, dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly tossed it into the fire. With a small cry, Mr. Miller lunged forward and snatched it out. "Better let it burn," the soldier said grimly. "If you don't want it, Davies," said the old man, "give it to me." "I won't," his friend said stubbornly. "I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Throw it back in the fire, like a sensible man." The other shook his head, examining his new possession. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Hold it up in your right hand and wish out loud," said the sergeant major, "but I warn you of the consequences." "Sounds like something from the Arabian Nights," said Mrs. Miller, as she rose to set the table for supper. "Do you think you could wish for an extra pair of hands for me?" Her husband pulled the talisman from his pocket, and all 3 of them burst into laughter as the sergeant major, a look of alarm on his face, grabbed his arm. "If you must wish," he said gruffly, "wish for something sensible." Mr. Miller put the paw back in his pocket, and they sat down for supper. The talisman was soon forgotten amidst a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. "If that story about the monkey's paw is as true as the rest of his tales," said Michael after their guest had left to catch the last train, "we won't be getting much out of it." "Did you give him anything for it, dear?" asked Mrs. Miller, looking closely at her husband. "A trifle," he said, blushing slightly. "He didn't want it, but I insisted, and he begged me again to throw it away." "Likely story," said Michael with mock horror. "Why, we're going to be rich, famous, and happy. Wish to be a king, Dad, to start. Then Mom can't boss you around." He darted around the table, pursued playfully by his mother. Mr. Miller took the paw from his pocket and looked at it uncertainly. "I don't know what to wish for, that's a fact," he said. "It seems to me I've got everything I want." "If you just paid off the house, you'd be perfectly happy, wouldn't you?" said Michael, his hand on his father's shoulder. "Well, wish for $5,000. That'll do it." His father, smiling sheepishly at his own foolishness, held up the talisman. His son, with a solemn face slightly ruined by a wink at his mother, sat at the piano and struck a few dramatic chords. "I wish for $5,000, the old man said distinctly. A loud crash from the piano met his words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from Mr. Miller. His wife and son rushed to his side. "It moved," he cried, glancing with disgust at the object on the floor. "As I wished, it twisted in my hand like a snake." "Well, I don't see the money," said his son, picking it up, "and I bet I never will." "It must have been your imagination, dear," his wife said, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head. "Never mind, no harm done, but it gave me quite a shock." They sat by the fire, the wind howling louder than ever outside. A deep, unusual silence settled upon them until the old couple rose to go to bed. "I expect you'll find the cash in a big bag on your bed," Michael joked as he bid them good night, "with some horrible creature squatting on top of your wardrobe, watching you pocket your ill-gotten gains." The next morning, in the bright winter sun, Michael laughed at his fears. The ordinary, wholesome air of the breakfast room made the previous night's events seem foolish. The dirty, shriveled little paw lay on the sideboard, regarded with indifference. "I suppose all old soldiers are the same," said Mrs. Miller. "The idea of us listening to such nonsense! How could wishes be granted these days? And even if they could, how could $5,000 possibly hurt you?" "Might fall on his head from the sky," said the cheerful Michael. Davies did say the wishes came true so naturally, his father remarked, that you could dismiss it as coincidence if you wanted. Well, don't spend it all before I get back, Michael said, rising from the table. I'm afraid it'll turn you into a greedy, miserly old man, and we'll have to disown you. His mother laughed, walked him to the door, and watched him head down the road to his job at Stanton Manufacturing. Later that day, Mrs. Miller was watching a well-dressed stranger outside, who seemed to be hesitating before their gate. He paused 3 times before finally, with sudden resolution, he opened it and walked up the path. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the parlor. I was asked to call, he said at last. I come from Stanton Manufacturing. The old lady startled. Is anything the matter? She asked breathlessly. Has something happened to Michael? Her husband interposed. Now, mother, sit down. Don't jump to conclusions. You haven't brought bad news, I'm sure, sir. I'm sorry, the visitor began. Is he hurt? Demanded the mother. The visitor bowed his head. Badly hurt, he said quietly. But he is not in any pain. Oh, thank God, the old woman whispered, clasping her hands. Thank God for that. Her voice trails off as the sinister meaning of his words dawned on her. She saw the awful truth in the man's averted gaze. She caught her breath and laid a trembling hand on her husband's arm. There was a long silence. He was caught in the machinery, the visitor said in a low voice. Caught in the machinery? Mr. Miller repeated in a daze. He stared blankly out the window, his hand gripping his wife's. He was the only one we had left, he said, turning to the visitor. It is hard. The visitor cleared his throat. The firm wishes me to convey their sincere sympathy with you in your great loss, he said, not looking at them. I must also state that Stanton Manufacturing disclaims all responsibility. They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation. Mr. Miller rose to his feet, a look of dawning horror on his face. His dry lips formed the words. How much? $5,000 was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's piercing shriek, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hands like a blind man, and collapsed in a heap on the floor. In the large new cemetery, 2 miles away, the old couple buried their son and returned to a house steeped in shadow and silence. The days passed in a haze of hopeless resignation. They had nothing left to talk about. About a week later, the old man woke suddenly in the night. The room was dark, but he could hear the sound of quiet weeping from the window. Come back to bed, he said tenderly. You'll catch a cold. It's colder for my son, the old woman wept. He drifted in and out of sleep until a sudden, sharp cry from his wife jolted him awake. The monkey's paw, she cried wildly. The paw! He sat up in alarm. Where? What is it? She stumbled across the room toward him. I want it, she said. You didn't destroy it, did you? It's in the parlor, on the shelf, he replied, bewildered. Why? She laughed and cried at once, bending over to kiss his cheek. I only just thought of it, she said hysterically. Why didn't I think of it before? The other 2 wishes. We've only used 1. Wasn't that enough? He demanded fiercely. No, she cried triumphantly. We'll have 1 more. Go down and get it, quick, and wish our boy alive again. The man flung the blankets from his trembling body. Good God, you're mad, he cried. Get it, she panted. Get it and wish. Oh, my boy, my boy. He went down into the darkness, his hands fumbling for the mantelpiece. He found the talisman, a horrible fear seizing him that the unspoken wish might bring his mutilated son before him in that very room. He grabbed it and felt his way back upstairs. His wife's face, white and expectant, seemed to hold an unnatural look. He was afraid of her. Wish, she cried in a commanding voice. It is foolish and wicked, he faltered. Wish, she repeated. He raised his hand. I wish my son alive again. The talisman dropped to the floor. He sank into a chair, trembling, as his wife went to the window to watch. He sat there, chilled to the bone, until the candle sputtered and died, plunging the room into darkness. With an unspeakable sense of relief that the wish had failed, he crept back into bed. They lay in silence, listening to the ticking of the clock. Suddenly, a quiet, stealthy knock sounded at the front door. The matches fell from Mr. Miller's hand. He stood motionless, holding his breath until the knock was repeated. Then he turned and fled back to his room, closing the door behind him. A third knock sounded through the house. "What's that?" cried the old woman, sitting up. "A rat," the old man stammered. "A rat. It passed me on the stairs." His wife sat listening. A loud, resounding knock shook the house. "It's Michael!" she screamed. "It's Michael!" She ran for the door, but her husband was there first, holding her back. "What are you doing?" he whispered hoarsely. "It's my boy. It's Michael," she cried, struggling. "I forgot the cemetery is 2 miles away. Let go of me. I must open the door." "For God's sake, don't let it in," the old man pleaded, trembling. "You're afraid of your own son," she shrieked, breaking free and running from the room. He followed her to the landing. He heard the chain rattle and the stiff bottom bolt being drawn back. "The bolt!" his wife cried from the darkness below. "I can't reach it." But her husband was already on his hands and knees, groping wildly on the floor for the paw. If only he could find it before the thing outside got in. A furious cascade of knocks thundered through the house. He heard a chair scrape as his wife dragged it to the door. He heard the slow creak of the bolt being slid back. At that exact moment, his fingers closed around the monkey's paw. Frantically, he breathed his third and final wish. The knocking ceased so suddenly that the echoes still hung in the air. He heard the chair being moved, the door being opened. A cold gust of wind rushed up the staircase, followed by a long, loud wail of disappointment and misery from his wife. It gave him the courage to run down to her side and then out to the gate beyond. The street lamp across the way flickered, its light shining on a quiet and utterly deserted road. The Millers learned a terrible truth that night, that fate is not a toy, and the price of interfering with its design can be more than any soul can bear. As the quiet road lay empty under the flickering street lamp, one is left to wonder, what was the final wish? What horror was so great that an empty road was a blessing? Some things, perhaps, are better left unknown.